Oh boy.
So when it came to your 70s era Skylines, we had the top of the line GTR model. That was your, very expensive twin cam motor. For these guys who always wanted, that GTR but could never afford it, we would make these small modifications, to kind of make their GT or their GTX a little bit more performance oriented. These things got a great looking exterior on it.
I think so too.
So that being said, it would be the addition of rear over fenders, front over fenders. We'd use the rear spoiler from the GTR, and then obviously modifying the motor as well. So you could really have that look and feel of a GTR without spending, let's call it $200,000 or $250,000 on a car. The modified GTs and GTXs are more for the casual enthusiasts versus, your collectors that would have the GTRs. First step is to kind of see what we've got and then take it from there. We didn't source the car, so we don't really know what we're starting with. The story behind this one is that I had gotten in contact with a guy who was stationed in Japan with the military. He ended up sourcing his own car and just needed help initially just importing it into the States. But after seeing the condition of the car that he had, we figured we might as well do some work to it while it's here. Our job as being specialists in this type of car, he felt it would be best for us to take care of the car. This is a 1972 GTX, obviously a Skyline. It used to have a fiberglass hood on it, so we've sourced a steel hood. So this is kind of what you'll be doing as far as paintwork. We're gonna be color matching this.
I'm always up for a good challenge, but this car, it's definitely gonna be a challenge.
We're doing front and rear over fenders on this one as well. On this one, it's gonna be a little bit different. We're gonna be doing color matched.
It's nice to try something different with the paint matched fenders, and I like it.
Let me show you what's going on with the trunk part of it. So it also had a fiberglass rear.
So we sourced a metal one too?
So we have a metal one,
okay.
But this is a spoiler that he had, which is a weird design I've never seen. It's only got one stud on it, and it's not even flat, so the thing is just kind of, and the one that he used to have obviously had two holes, so I've got another spoiler coming that's the proper style with the two holes.
Okay.
So we're gonna be paint matching the spoiler to that as well, and then also this trunk. It looks like this car's been through quite a few hands over the years. Inside the car, we're gonna be doing a full carpet kit. We also have a bolting cage that's going in the rear that he wants to do.
Oh, nice.
And we're gonna do a little bit of touch up on the seat back. And we're changing out the pedals as well.
Lots of wiring, clean up, and
yeah, Josh has got his
go
work
through all
cut
the
out
electrics and everything, make sure everything works. If you're willing to restore one of these cars, you have to be willing to take on whatever that entails.
45-year-old wiring is a nightmare. And
I'm used to nothing working at all, so if anything works, that's cool. If not, it doesn't matter. I'll make it work.
It's a really good motor, sounds strong. We've got some 50mm Mikunis, so I mean, this has got to be a pretty sizable motor to have that size of carb.
50s are very rare.
More or less just going through, making it reliable, syncing the carbs, rejetting, making sure that everything is running properly.
It's making it aesthetically pleasing.
Right.
A lot of this stuff, it just could be cleaner. There's just no point in having all these loose connectors and just this ugly, like, GM-style loom and stuff that would normally be used in the car at all.
The other thing that we're going to do in here, Mauricio, is this. So not necessarily that this is any sort of a rust issue. This has been patched before, but when they put on the seam sealer, they did a real sloppy job of it, and he doesn't like that. So what we're gonna do is just sort of clean this up so that it doesn't look like it was put on with a toothbrush or something. It's sort of a mixture of parts that people have thrown on over the years, and what our job to do here is put everything together and make it all make sense. I think there's a lot of improvements to be had with, these minor things that we want to do with it.
Yeah, just to give it a little bit of a facelift to make it look presentable and
exactly
drivable, that's the main key. That's what he wants.
We're gonna start working on doing the mock-up on the over fenders here, get everything put on the car. That way, everything's all mocked up and ready to go when you pick it up, and you can just paint what you need to paint.
Let the fun begin.
1972 Skyline GTX. First thing we're gonna do is get the red out of this hood. We're going to replace the rear spoiler with a higher quality version. And we're also going to add a chin spoiler up front. We're going to remove the mirrors and over fenders so we can repaint them. New wheels and tires will give this car a better stance and better handling. New carpet, restored center console, and a bolt-in roll cage will complete the interior. This car's final destination is Hawaii, and this might be a little bit of a biased opinion here, but I think it's definitely going to be the coolest car on the island. the last thing you want to do is have to modify a part after it's already been painted. It really makes sense for us to do the mock-up beforehand. That way we know that if we have to make any modification of these parts, that it's done before paint's on the car. I'm just gonna make a rough line here so we know where to tape. These fenders are made to be used on the stock steel fenders. However, we have fiberglass fenders, so we're not entirely sure how that's gonna fit together right. So it's very important to do the mock-up to make sure that everything works out like we think it's going to before we start the cutting. You just wanna make sure when you're putting on a wider wheel that the fender's placed right front to back so that when this wheel turns, it doesn't contact the bottom of this over fender. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna cut out the existing fender right now and then remount the fender. Whoever wants to get dirty. Luckily, the guys I work with aren't afraid of fiberglass.
I vote not it.
Not me.
I'll do it. I enjoy it. Fiberglass. Itchy. I don't mind being a little itchy as long as everything fits.
Ready?
Yeah, crank it all the way right. Turn it back. So we're still getting some contact here, which is exactly why we're doing this, because you need to make sure that we have the clearance.
I think what you were gonna have to do is cut this completely all the way off.
Because that's what's preventing the
That's
bottom.
what's preventing from the turn, so.
Yeah, fiberglass, man, I love it. Especially when it's all up in my business. You coming? Oh, yeah. It's the money.
This is not OSHA approved.
Oh, that's a good one. After a nice little fiberglass bath, it looks like the fenders are working exactly like we want them to. We've got proper clearance with the wheels, and everything's looking good so far. About the world's easiest install. You can see how this sits perfectly flat on there. It's not gonna rock back and forth. So you've got some obvious work to do around here and with the whole deck lid itself, but this one's ready to go.
Before I think about doing any body work on this car, I gotta get this tape off this hood. So I guess the client's buddy thought it would be funny if you put a rising sun across. So as the car traveled from Japan to the United States, the backing of the tape went right through to the metal. Even with aircraft stripper, this red does not want to come off. I don't know what it is. It's really chocolatey. We're gonna have to go to plan B. Should have lifted it all up by now.
This 72 Skyline has now been all mocked up, and now we're ready for paint. If only Mauricio could get that tape off the hood.
The backing of the tape went right through to the metal. After using a ton of aircraft stripper, washing it down, then I went to the drum, and we finally got all the stuff off. We're in good shape now. Luckily, we got it down to the raw metal substrate, so we're good. I got everything prepped, everything's ready. Now it's time to paint this. This is where the fun begins, my friend. The primer's an easy spot, but the client wants us to butt match it. And honestly, I got my work cut out on this.
A butt match is when you're simply getting two panels and you're trying to get them to match without blending the panel adjacent to it.
To be honest with you, doing a butt match takes twice as long than doing a blend. When you're blending, you can actually blend with the adjacent panel. It's a lot easier, but butt match, you have to be patient and do a few little spray outs. It's time consuming, but I think the end result, you'll be happy with it. Good, I think we're good now.
We've got a new project here in the shop. This is a 1971 Nissan S Coupe. Now, this is a Japanese market-only version. On the exterior, the main difference is in the C-pillar. The main difference between the S model is higher compression and dual carbs, which made about 15 more horsepower than the base model.
The benefit of this being a S Coupe is it actually has the correct L16T, so it would have had dual SUs from factory, closed chamber head, flat top pistons.
It looks like it's how it came off the assembly line.
This car also has some really cool features I want to show the guys. We rarely get these cars with the original seats in it, but what they do, fold back like that. And this seat folds forward.
And I'm sure there's lots of uses for it, but the whole purpose, I guess, was just for comfort.
Maybe if you're a little smaller.
Or if you're out, you know, with your lady friend and you're having a picnic or whatever, that's cool.
The client that we sourced this for mainly wanted us to focus on the exterior and the interior of the car. So mainly getting everything on the exterior back to exactly how it would have been when it left the factory, you know, in 1971. When we got it, every single chrome piece was all black on the car. I kind of had my suspicions as to why. I mean, you don't usually do that unless there's a reason for it. That could be a simple styling choice, or it could be something covering a problem underneath. This is what the grille and every other trim part looked like on the car. They just sprayed everything. For us, the grille is stainless steel, so all we got to do is strip this down and then polish everything that needs to be polished, and then we got to come back in and do black again on the areas that are supposed to be black. But, you know, it's straight. This should be relatively easy to undo what he's done here. The only way to know what's underneath the black is to strip the paint.
Yeah, I think this is a good candidate, Eric. I think you did a good job on this one. Looks good.
Hopefully I've got something that's still usable. The overall idea here is to undo what they did and get it back to how it would have looked, you know, directly from the factory. But even in Japan, this stuff is no longer available new. So that's why we have to go through this process, because you can't find this stuff. So you're left to deal with what you've got and, you know, try to work with what you've got and bring it back to how it should be. We've actually got a grill that's in really good condition. The grill itself is stainless steel. That'll be pretty easy. We've got to knock out a few dents, polish that up. While the grill looks good, we didn't quite get as lucky on the rest of the pieces.
So you can see now after we get the paint off why it was painted. All those little divots here, that's all corrosion. And so when they were sanding it down to paint it, that's all these raw edges are, and it went through the copper.
We're gonna send everything out to the chrome shop, and fingers crossed that it comes back looking nice and shiny and perfect again. The door handles, C-pillar vents, and taillight bezels are all pot metal. Pot metal's very prone to corrosion, and what happens when pot metal corrodes is that it gets pitted, really deep pits, and what we've noticed on this one is that we've got a lot of pitting going on, so we're gonna do our best to salvage what we've got.
Way better than it was. That's not even a question.
So now we got that done, time to get all of this taken care of. Josh got all of our black paint off the grill, and it actually looks pretty good under here. So now what I gotta do is try to, since these are gonna be sitting right next to each other, we gotta try to make this stainless steel look like this chrome, which they're two different materials. They're never gonna look identical, but you can get a pretty good amount of shine out of this. So get it cleaned up and see how it turns out. We've got to get this back to factory original specification. Now, there were multiple grill models for multiple different years. And so for us, that actually means adding some black back into the grill in the proper areas that it was supposed to be from the factory. Got it back to proper triple S, specifications as to what's supposed to be polished and what's supposed to be black. So I think that's going to make a huge improvement in the front end of the car.
All right. Cool.
The taillight bezels are very similar to the front grille, where we've got to put in some black to make them look exactly how they would have been when they left the factory.
That's really what's going to set this car off. The taillights are what make a Bluebird, honestly.
Back of this car is looking like it should. Hell of a lot better than we started with. On the interior of the car, we've got the new headliner in place, we've got our new carpet in. Exterior-wise, we've got all our new chrome bits on there. Headlights and taillights are looking exactly like they should. This car's looking really nice. So this is always the best part when you put wheels on, is lowering it down. But I think it looks good, man. I think it's a great look for the car.
Yeah, definitely.
Even though we're not doing a huge amount of work to the motor, we want to get it out and make sure that it's reliable. And this car is really fun to drive.
So we're ready to go from your standard coilover cars that we're used to normal old suspension. It feels totally different.
The client that we sourced this car for mainly wanted us to focus on the interior and the exterior. He's going to be taking care of the drivetrain itself. He's going to have a built motor in it, exhaust, probably coilovers. And for the last 510 we built, being completely modified in every sense, to this one actually being mostly original, from like the steering wheel. The steering wheel feels gigantic in this car, but yeah, that's how it was. Something's not good.
Well, got fuel pump. Got spark.
I think it's gonna. No spark. When we're importing, a 40 or 50-year-old car from Japan, we don't necessarily know if it was driven a month ago or if it's been stored for 5 years. But we at least want it to drive more than 2 blocks.
Right now, I'm making sure we have power. And we don't. We have power to it, it's just not through these connections. Try it. We have power in the wire, but all of the contacts are so rusty because I don't believe they were disconnected when the engine bay was painted. They just kind of left everything attached and pulled the harness out as one. So power is not flowing through contact points.
It's all part of the process with old cars. Why I usually bring a skateboard with me. Unfortunately, this time I forgot the skateboard, so Josh is going to have to head back to the shop and pick up the parts we need.
I came back and I grabbed a few spare ignition parts. I grabbed an extra coil, ballast resistor, extra set of points, and just some Scotch-Brite and things to clean terminals and contacts. That sounds good. Okay. If we need it. I've worked on enough of these cars to know that, there's just a few points you can check to see and know pretty much what's going on. That's a condenser. I gotta put that in. Oh, I hope this coil's good.
You can crank it still?
Yeah.
Good, and we don't have to tow it back. A roadside fix. Aside from the ignition problem, I'm pretty happy with how the car's running so far.
The car is running fine now and I'm able to get back. I just want to make sure that there's no more issues that could be a problem in the future. What we have here, these are actually original wires. These are the Izaki ones. These are awesome, but they don't really fit the plugs anymore. The ends of these are corroded, and this doesn't really fit well. The end of it also broke off in the coil. We have a good Nissan cap. I cleaned up the rotor a little bit just so the contacts are nice, but all those in there are good. Then we're gonna upgrade to a set of these spark plug wires. So what I'm gonna do right now is throw in the new stuff, and then we're gonna fire it up and go for another drive and see how she goes. Yeah, I got some new wires in. I made sure all the connections are fine, and I got a replacement coil, and it should be fine now.
Yeah, buddy. Now that we've got the car running, we're gonna focus on the rest of the badges for this car. The other cool thing is that I was able to track down almost every single badge for this car. If you remember, you know, the badges were pretty rough. And this is something to where you can restore them, but we lucked out and found some really nice reproductions. These are really, really hard to find even in Japan, and I found them from a dude named Hector in California, so.
Thank you, Hector.
Yeah.
You're awesome.
So I've got the arduous task of badge installation, super, super difficult. So you can see what the badge is supposed to look like. These will look nice. Oh yeah. There we go. No guesswork here. Pretty hard to mess that up. Nice little finishing touch on the front end of this car. Make it look exactly how it was supposed to look. And there we go, ready to go in the car. Looks good. So much better, not blacked out. Quite a difference from blackness to like nice polished stainless and chrome. I mean,
Just that, to me, like visually, has added so much value to the car.
I mean, that's what made 70s cars cool.
Yeah.
You know, it was all the chrome trim, all the stainless trim.
Kind of the last of that before it went to plastics.
So yeah, man, I think it looks awesome. Hopefully this goes a little better than last time, we'll see.
Feels better.
Yeah, feels way better. We started with, you know, basically a shell of a car. It had a drivetrain and everything, but
1990s black emblems and chrome.
yeah, I mean, getting all the chrome back on the car makes such a big difference because, you know, that's what differentiates a 70s car from what we see now. You know, you see plastic bumpers on everything. It's easier if it's rusty to just paint it and forget about it, right?
Yeah, I mean, if that's what you're cool with, I guess. It's your car, then sure, but...
We had to do it the hard way and actually get it back to the way it's supposed to be, which is obviously a bit more work, but man, this is exactly how they should be.
If it was my car, it would be one of the first things I did, is exactly what we did.
Oh man. People always ask, you know, like what's it like to drive a right-hand drive car? And like for me, the most tricky thing and kind of the scariest thing is when you're trying to turn left and it's really hard to see that oncoming traffic.
Yeah.
That and the obvious, you know, the drive-through is always an interesting scenario too. That first time out on the road in these cars is always a little hairy. Anything can happen. You could be stranded anywhere, and it's just part of the game.
I like this car.
The Bluebird's now running a lot better with the ignition changes we've made, so I think now it's at a really good point where we can hand it off to the customer and let him do whatever he wants to do with it from here. Spot on with that match. I mean, that looks...
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, it looks way better.
Mauricio just finished up paint matching the parts we're putting on the car, and everything looks really good.
I hope he's happy.
From the way this car came here and to the way it's gonna leave, I mean, I'd drive it all day long, man. To be honest, we've really only just begun. We just have to make sure that everything fits.
This is like when you're really hungry in the morning, you know, and you like buy a muffin, and you're spending like forever just trying to unwrap the muffin so you can eat it. So you like pretty much are over the muffin by the time you get the saran wrap off. But most people don't have razor blades. You can learn a lot just from details on how it was built, how it was put together, you know, if they cared about it, and that's what I care about. It gives it a chin that it's missing. It's like when you have someone at the nursing home that lost their dentures. It's kind of what it looks like.
Josh is a deep person. When you're working in real tight corners, you can really see
how deep of a person he is.
I also don't name vehicles. Like, people name vehicles, I don't.
The Z is like it has to be a girl, though, because that's what it is, you know? Fair Lady Z.
Maybe. I believe cars have personalities, but you gotta keep them in check.
The reason sometimes people call it a she is because she wouldn't cheat on you. She won't treat you wrong.
That's not true. They must have never owned a Datsun.
The customer wanted to do what's called welting on the fenders. And what that will do is kind of give some separation between the body. Usually don't use them because we typically do these trim black, so they don't really require this. Tracking down this welting is a little bit more difficult than you would think. It's really hard to find the correct diameter and the correct width that we're looking for. You can find it really big. It's really hard to find that small. Looks like it's gonna work out. So what we gotta do, run it all the way around the outside of the fenders and then trim it to fit. Fenders look good, yeah. Front spoiler looks awesome. It's gonna look cool.
It's coming together. It looks really good.
Agreed, mostly. The thing that always bugged me about these is they go through the effort of printing the skyline underneath, but then when you're looking at it, it's upside down and backwards. So, like, who reads that? It's like...
So it needs to be
just backwards.
backwards.
So maybe looking at me like I'm weird for removing these taillights, but they're actually an upside down. And that's an easy mistake to do if you don't have another car for reference.
No engineer, but I believe the reason they're this way, the top is longer than the bottom, and that kind of provides a little bit of a
light
shade.
shield and reflection also.
All right. Americans sometimes know a little bit more about how to put these cars together than some of the guys that are working on them in Japan, which is kind of odd to think about. The back end has come together nicely. Now it's time to help this car find its identity. Check this out, Mauricio. I got these in from Japan. This was the original badges. You can see over time, this color just falls out of it. That's what it would look like on a GTR. This car started out as a GTX model. We've got some GTR parts on the car. So I mean, it's a little bit GT, GTX, and GTR. On an original car would actually be gold in here on a GTX.
okay.
On a GT, this would be blue, and on a GTR, it's red. To match all the rest of the badging the car came with, we decided to go with the red ones.
Kind of like those. Those look really nice with the red.
Which is why we use the GT Kai badge. That means, you know, GT modified, which is exactly what this car is. It's not really any of anything. It's just kind of a lot of everything.
This badge doesn't look so hot anymore, so now we're running the GT Kai, which that'll be a little bit more appropriate for this.
But those aren't the badges that have me concerned. We'll actually be pulling the stock Skyline badge from the fiberglass rear deck lid that he had before, and we have to be very careful because we're going to try to reuse this on the new one.
Problem is with every badge like this you remove, it was usually put on a different way. I love that. That looks really good.
And you would think, oh man, it's just bubbling rust under here, but it's fiberglass, so it's just a weird paint reaction, I guess.
Gross.
So far, we've spent most of our time in the exterior of the car, and now it's time to focus on the engine bay. By today's standards, this would be considered sort of a crude casting, but when you're trying to do some of these period parts, I think that's only what makes it, you know, cool. Time to get that old crusty one off, and we'll get this one on. They never really used the name Datsun in Japan, you know, on a few trucks here and there, but Datsun was mainly something reserved for the US market. But just like how here in the United States, we kind of like to do the Japanese stuff because it's unique. In Japan, they were doing the other thing. They thought the Datsun name was cool because that was used in the States.
I definitely think it'll look better. It's just you never know how everything fits.
Almost. Fuel pressure regulator here, as you can see, is resting right on these fins. So as that motor moves around, it's gonna be a bad situation for that guy. We want this car to run as reliably as possible so he doesn't run into any problems down the road. Fuel leaks and fires and that kind of stuff.
You don't like fires? It's a Nissan, not a Porsche, man.
Once again, not even a valve cover is a bolt-on scenario, because nothing is. I think I can make a slight modification to this bracket on the fuel pressure regulator and it should clear the valve cover just fine. Hopefully that gives us enough room to do what we need to. It's kind of a weird notch because of the way the holes were done from the factory, but we only need a little bit, so should be okay. It looks nice. Much better and most importantly safer, to say the least. Last part. Ooh. Oh, that's anticlimactic. Are you kidding me? Do you think you'd be able to just put an L series oil cap into another L series valve cover, but some sort of difference going on here. I gotta work it out.
We have a 2017 Civic Type R.
It's a Honda and it's a Type R and it's red. Three things that Mauricio loves.
This is my first brand new car I've ever had in my life.
You still got the plastic on the mats and everything.
0 to 60 is 4.9 seconds. It has 306 horsepower, 295 torque at 2,500 RPMs. It's turboed. It's fun. I love it.
The cool part is about this, it's got 3 different settings. It's got comfort, sport, and then you got the R+. The R+ just ups the boost, and it just wants to move.
So is this in R mode right now?
Yeah, this is an R mode.
It's quick, man.
It feels really good. 1st through 4th, it's okay. Once you hit 5th and 6th, it just wants to just go.
Yeah. You know, another thing that I'm really impressed with just by sitting in the passenger seat is how well this thing soaks up the bumps. You know, like on our old cars, we throw on coilovers.
We would feel everything.
You're skipping around.
You're bouncing and everything. I mean, we're gonna hit a dip right here. It just molds to it.
Feels good, man. It's quiet.
I couldn't be any happier. I love this car.
I'm stoked that I made the purchase. Definitely worth my money, I'll tell you that.
Yeah. We're not doing a full restoration on this 72 Skyline, but we've made a lot of improvements in multiple areas of the car. Now, if I can only get this oil cap to cooperate. Are you kidding me? Do you think you'd be able to just put an L series oil cap into another L series valve cover, but some sort of difference going on here. I gotta work it out.
Try this. See if that guy works.
Of course, a plain old plastic one fits, but that's not the look we're going for here. I wonder if it's just the outside diameter of these is just a tiny bit bigger. I mean, thread pitch is the
That
same.
or like when they made that one, it's more precise than how they make these,
Yeah.
and it doesn't work.
I'm not ready to give up quite yet. Huh. Well, it actually does work. It just requires a bit more effort than normal, but it'll work. Ah, now it's loosened up. It's crazy though, because it's like it felt like it was kind of funky, but you just have to put a little bit more effort into it. What do you think, man?
I like the valve cover a lot. Just something different.
Big improvement from when we got it. I mean, just from all the wiring fixes, you know, all the random cleanup we've done.
Oh yeah, no, it's worlds better.
I can imagine this thing's a little bit tricky to get in. Now it's time to move on to the interior, and we're gonna start with installing our roll cage. This is what they call a bolt-in cage, which means that it bolts into the car.
Not do that.
Because this car has no B-pillar, What you're kind of doing here is effectively adding a B-pillar by putting the roll cage in there. So if this car was ever to get in an accident, instead of this crushing down here, you'd have a roll bar to sort of help out with that. Well, I guess got the cage in. We'll get to the rest of the interior now.
This stuff is awesome because it's the vinyl. There's also a wood aspect to it, so like as it ages, you can actually splinter this. It's really weird. Kind of appears cheesy sometimes when you do like a wood decal, but that's how these cars work.
Looks good, man. You can smell that rich mahogany from the wood sticker smell. While Josh puts the final touches on the center console, I have my own modification I need to take care of. Another thing this customer had asked for is some nice pedal covers. They've already done the hard part and they've welded this plate to it. What I'm gonna do is just shave that plate down so that we don't see the stock pedal underneath it anymore. We put the pedals in because they have more grip. They're a little bit wider, so you can heel toe, you know, use the clutch and the brake and the gas a lot easier. The reason I get it back in the car is because we want to make sure that these are as straight as possible with each other. It's a little bit of a pain, but not more of a pain than it would be to pull the whole brake and clutch pedal out of the car. Matching pedals that you can actually grip is a good thing. Much better than what we had. So I guess we're on to the rest of the interior.
Looks a lot better in here than it did.
There it is. It's almost time for a test drive, but before we can do that, we've got to get everything finished up assembly-wise on the car.
Tires are awesome too. They have a cool tread pattern.
Right.
Tires that we don't get here in the States.
Yeah. JDM down to the tires, man.
Yeah.
We've got all the exterior, interior, all the pretty stuff figured out with this car, but the last thing that we need to do is make sure that it actually runs properly. Okay, fire that up, Josh. Basically what I'm doing here, we've got all these carbs that are all independent, but we're trying to get them to work as one. It's barely idling right now, and it looks like we've got one that's taking a bit more air than the rest of them. And the idea is to use our synchronizer here, which will tell us how much vacuum it's pulling, to get them all pulling the same amount of vacuum. While we're making adjustments to our carburetors, we're going to use what's called a wideband sensor, so that we know that the car is getting the proper amount of fuel that it needs at idle. So we're about 14.7s here, about 800 RPMs?
Yeah, it's about 8.
That seems pretty happy there. I think we should get it out and see what it feels like.
I think so too.
Everything looks really good at idle. We're getting the proper air-fuel ratios we need. The next step here is to get it out on the street. That way we know what it's doing under load and at wide open throttle.
Hopefully it's all good. Hopefully it's all good.
Before we can deliver this 72 Skyline to our client, we have to make sure it passes the road test. It's like real park throttle, low RPM, it just is kind of hanging out. It gets out of it eventually, but it's almost like it's kind of seems like a misfire, I think.
Yeah, definitely feels like one.
It's not really affecting the air-fuel ratios much. The misfire is something we'll definitely need to address here at the shop. Hopefully that's our only issue. Brakes feel solid. No clunks. Steering feels pretty tight. Pretty centered. As for the rest of the car, I think we're in pretty good shape. Air-fuel ratios, you know, they're looking safe.
Yeah. First things first, I have to check the plugs and see what's going on with the misfire. From what I'm seeing, you have a little bit of burn. That one's really clean, and that one's burning. This is number 5. That points me to a carb issue or a fuel delivery problem, which I'm going to investigate right now. So this one's got fuel. This one's a little wet. It's evidence, yes. This one looks dry. That's number 5. That one has fuel in it now. Number 5 is the problem. This one's good. I found a bunch of debris in the carb, and in order to remedy that situation, I have to get my fluid extractor and I have to suck all the crap out and just make sure that there's no more debris in there and fill it back up with gas and hope that she works. I believe I got it all out. It looks really good.
Before Josh installs the new spark plugs, there's one final step.
Normally, when you install spark plugs in a car, you have an OEM recommended spark plug gap. In between here, when this fires, you have a little spark inside, and that's called a kernel. Because this car has a 30-year-old kind of weaker ignition, I need to gap these down a little bit so we have a little bit shorter spark kernel. That way it doesn't have to jump as far. Normally, your factory plug gap would be like 35 thousandths. So I'm just gonna go down to 30, and I'm gonna try that. That fits really snugly. That's exactly 30 thousandths.
Now that the plugs are gapped properly and cleaned, it's time to test it again. Much snappier than it was before.
It definitely sounds way better.
That misfire seems to be pretty much taken care of. It's loud though, man. The true test of the car is to get it out on the road and get some wide open throttle, get some cruising, really put it through its paces. So I guess this is sort of the moment of truth to see if all this work we've done to this car has had a positive effect.
Yeah.
Pulls nice.
Yeah, it does.
No misfire, plenty of power. That's exactly what we're looking for.
This doesn't like civilized driving at all.
No.
We're like cruising next to a Ford Focus, and it's like not happy about it.
Seems like it was built with the intent of some track usage.
I'm sure it probably saw its 2 days.
Yeah, probably really good at that. Not so good at getting groceries though.
Definitely not a grocery getter. I would not suggest daily driving this car in traffic.
We've made some really nice additions to the exterior of the car too.
Oh yeah, I mean, I remember the red hood with the taped like rising sun on it.
This car's come a long way since we first received it.
Terrible spoiler and trunk.
That's right, it had a fiberglass trunk on it. We got the new front spoiler on it, which I love. That thing is incredible.
Great quality spoiler. Same with the rear.
Yeah, I think this car's got a great look now.
Did the paint match flares, front flares.
Yeah, and I really like that style too. You know, it's not something we do a whole lot, but it's cool to do something a little bit different on this car. And
yeah, especially with a different set of wheels we never really use.
I think Mark's really gonna be happy with this car.
Yeah, I hope so, yeah.
There can't be many of these around Hawaii. The client for this car is in Hawaii, but it really doesn't matter where it's gonna be. The car looks awesome. Well, I think it's gonna be really happy with it. I would be.
Yeah, I would be too. Yeah, boy.